So as we were listening to Nancy read the gospel lesson, you might have thought, this is kind of weird. Commentators routinely remark that the parable of the dishonest or corrupt manager stands among the most challenging texts in the New Testament, often regarding it as the most perplexing of Jesus' parables. We don't know exactly what to do with this parable. In most of Jesus' stories, we know who to root for. The Samaritan, the leper who returned to thank Jesus, the woman who searched and searched for her silver coin and then rejoiced in finding it. But for whom do we cheer in this parable? The landowner who had given out ridiculous loans to people? The steward who skimmed off money from every debt collected? Neither of them seems to be good Jewish men who love God and others as commanded by the faith. One even wonders if Luke had a clue when he recorded this parable because he seems to include some different sayings read and sprinkled into it. Amid the confusing message are a couple of things that do make sense to us. If you can trust others in little things, you can also trust them in greater. And you can't worship both God and money. Yet, the rest doesn't seem to make any sense. So in order to understand what this parable might mean to us, we first have to understand just a little bit about the economics of the Roman-occupied Galilee in Jesus' time. Rich landlords and rulers were absolute loan sharks, and they used exorbitant interest rates to amass more land and to disinherit peasants from their land. Putting interest on loans was a violation of the biblical covenantal law. It seems that wealthy people in Jesus' day had conveniently forgotten that part of the law, or maybe had been pulled into the practices of the Gentile world that surrounded them. On top of that, Jesus' ministry often invoked the ideas of being good stewards of money and the concept of the Jubilee, which was a recurring year for the Jews in which debts were regularly forgiven, thus bringing joy to those who loaned money through the act of mercy toward the poor. Economic forgiveness was also a part of the joy in Mary's Magnificat declaration when she found out that she was pregnant with God's child. Jesus famously proclaimed the joy of the gospel of the tax collectors like Zacchaeus and Matthew, one of his very own disciples. When Zacchaeus restores what he had defrauded from other people, he is restored to the community. And Jesus said, "Today has come salvation to this house." The debt contracts in Jesus' time included exorbitant interest hidden from often illiterate peasants. Debts grew instead of lessening over time. Does that sound familiar? High interest student loans, predatory payday loans, title loans, or even harsh austerity measures imposed on countries whose citizens had absolutely no role in agreeing to a national debt. That had been happening with the rich landowners and those in his debt. The debt interest rates were illegal. So the wealthy created ways to charge interest under other guises, often hidden interest rates rolled into the principal. Get this. In Galilee at the time of Jesus, interest rates appear to have been 25% for money loans and 50% for loans on goods. It would be impossible for the poor, or even what we would call the middle class, to get out of this kind of system. And the money would keep rolling in for the wealthy until the debtor died, and then land and possessions could be taken from the family to settle the debt. The praise heaped on the scandalous steward is difficult for us to understand. The crooked steward is called enterprising, or shrewd, or even wise. By cooking the books in the opposite direction, the steward may have been simply forgiving his cut of the debt, or he may have been doing what the law of God commands, namely forgiving all the hidden interest in the debt contracts. Another part of this teaching that I struggled with are the words, "If you have been faithful with what belongs to another, unfaithful in what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own?" At first, this seemed to say being faithful to the landowner included the interest he was charging is what was being faithful. What if instead the opposite might be equally plausible? That Jesus might have been talking about being faithful to what rightfully belonged to the peasants, that other, who were being disinherited of their land. Jesus was always one to turn things around and make us see something new. This reminds me of a story from the Tales of the Dervishes. This book is a collection of folk tales, parables, and stories from the Sufi tradition, a sect of Islam. These writings illuminate the care and concern found in the Quran, just like the Mishnah does for the Torah, or the use of Jesus' parables do for the understanding of our covenant with God. This story is called The Bequest. It seems that a man died far from home. In the bequest, written into his will, were these words: "Let the community where the land is situated take what they wish for themselves, and let them give that which they wish to Arif the humble." The elders were puzzled about this at first. Arif was a young man, practically a beggar, an insignificant member of the community. Why leave him anything at all? So they allocated a few insignificant items from the man's estate that would eventually go to Arif, and divided the rest of the riches among themselves. Several years later, Arif, having grown into a man of stature and integrity, came to the elders to claim his portion of the bequest. As the elders in the community were in the midst of giving Araph the few insignificant things they had chosen from him, an unknown man appeared among them in their meeting. He inquired about the exact wording of the bequest, and he was told, "Let the community where the land is situated take what they wish for themselves, and let them give that which they wish to Araph the humble." The unknown man said to the elders, "I believe you have misinterpreted the meaning of this man's last wishes. The meaning of the will is that you should give to Araph that which you wished for yourselves, for he can make the best use of it." There was a great silence among the elders. And then, in a moment of illumination, they saw the error of their interpretation and the true meaning of the bequest. The unknown man continued, "The man died unable to protect his property. And if he had made Araph the sole inheritor when he was too young to take on the responsibility, the community would have had great dissension among them. So he entrusted to you, the elders, with the care of the land for a time, knowing that if you thought you were caring for your own possession, it would be well cared for. He made a wise provision for the preservation and transmission of his treasure. Now it is time for it to go to its rightful owner, Araph the humble. Give to him what you had wished for yourselves." And so the bequest did go to Araph, and everyone learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes we need to take a different look at things like money matters and separate God's teachings from those of the world. I think that is what Jesus was getting at in this parable. God has given us things, and it's up to us to use those things as God has taught us to use them. And sometimes it's helpful to take our worldly understanding or interpretation and ask, what if the opposite is true? The point of this very strange parable might mean for us questioning how we practice neighbor love in economic relationships in the midst of unjust structures. Too often we fall back on civil law instead of God's law. And because unjust structures are so implanted in our legal culture as well as our social culture, we may be led astray by worshiping mammon and wealth. But Jesus reminds us that we cannot have two superiors in life. Either we will hate the one and love the other, or we will be attentive to one and despise the other. In our social structure, we don't like hearing stuff like that. Jesus, in this case, is not talking about personal behavior so much as he is talking about systemic evil. And while we often don't think we can do anything about the system, we're wrong. We can call attention to problems at work. We can give our loyalty to companies that don't abuse their workers. For example, our pension fund in the United Methodist Church was actually called on these issues some years ago. And they ended up divesting of any stocks or bonds with some of the companies who intentionally polluted or destroyed creation, or intentionally marginalized groups of people. Now, our investments go to renewable energies, at-risk communities, companies that are consistently lowering their carbon footprint, and positive social purpose investments. The purpose of the United Methodist financial system is to honor the mission and the principles of our denomination. This was a huge step forward, and it came from everyday people speaking out and demanding that we put our money where our collective mouth was. It can be done. Jesus showed us how it can be done. In our parable for this morning, we are reminded that Jesus layered his teachings, and they can mean many things. Being responsible is one of the messages we get over and over again. There used to be a bumper sticker that said, "Change how you see, not how you look." Our challenge as Christians is to see things differently, not by human standards, but by those of our God.